Hey everybody, and welcome to the DnD podcast. Today I have a fun story. This is the time that the wizard of the group summoned a very powerful demon, or it may have been a fiend, while the entire group was only level 4. Now, this took place during the campaign book Waterdeep Dragon Heist, but there are no spoilers for the module that I will be talking about. So during their downtime, all of my characters like to do different things. Some of them like to help run the bar. Some of them just decide to rest. One of them liked to go to the library and read, just to better himself with knowledge, and because he chose to do that, I gave him a few extra lore notes on Roll20 that the others didn't have access to, and he could choose to share that information with them at any time, if he so wanted. It was completely up to him. And I had another player who spent his time trying to summon demons. I said, and he came to me and he told me, I really want to summon demons so we can fight one and then we can gain a huge amount of XP. I tell him, okay, that, first of all, that assumes you're able to defeat a demon. That will give you a massive amount of XP because I don't use the milestone system, I use XP. Even though Waterdeep says to use the milestone system. Then he said, yeah, I know, but I want to do it anyway. I tell him, okay, since you have never summoned a demon before, this is not your expertise with your magic school, since you have gone over your backstory with me in excruciating detail, and because you have no concept, well, you do have a concept of what it is, but you have no way of knowing what you're doing, you're going to have to roll a D100 for me. Every time only once per day when you want to do this. And I would only let him successfully summon this if he rolled either a 99 or a 100, because I was feeling fairly generous and not just making it a natural 100. Because you never know, some people get lucky. He never did. But during a mission, he found a book. I asked him to roll to see what kind of condition it was, because there were some other events going on at the time that may have damaged the condition. And he rolls a nat 20. I tell him not only is it in a really good condition, but it's a book that you would want. It is a book that would help you in summoning. So with this book, I lowered the DC to 97, 98, 99, or 100, and that would successfully summon it. Still very unlikely, but a little bit more possible. Instead of a 2 out of 100 chance, he now has a 4 out of a 100 chance, doubling his odds. So he continues every night to roll. One night, though, the Dragonborn Ranger, there's a little trinket shop in Waterdeep. It's not a required thing to do at all, but it's just a nice little thing you can go by and pick out some random trinkets that you can roll for. One of my players got a journal. Now, the description was a journal with 7 missing pages in it. And immediately my mind went to, that sounds very familiar. Then my eyes open very wide, and I go to my player, and since I'm the DM, I can do whatever I want. I say, it's a journal with 8 missing pages in it. She doesn't seem too bothered by this, but so she pays for it, and then she takes it back to the bar, and they're home. Now, she opens it, and I tell her, you see that there are 7 missing pages between these 2 spines for this book, but there are 8 missing pages between the 2 spines of this book, but there were only ever 8 pages. And as soon as you open it, you feel a dark presence all around you. It feels very far away, but it does not go away. You continuously feel this presence, though it does not currently threaten you, and you do not feel threatened by it, but it is there nonetheless. She's a little suspicious for a while, but then doesn't think too much of it. For those of you wondering, the reason I changed it from 7 to 8 pages will become obvious in a minute, but I will go ahead and tell you that there is a very famous video game called Slender the 8 Pages. I'm assuming a lot of you are familiar with it. If not, you may be a little bit more familiar with it in a moment. Now, as that very night, when my player is rolling to summon demons, he rolls a 99. I'm kind of in shock by this because his die have only been rolling. Well, his d20 had been abnormally lucky. Some of us honestly thought he may have been fudging a few dice rolls, though I do believe him because I've seen him roll in person, and he has the luckiest d20 I have ever seen. But the d100, it usually doesn't roll too well. He usually rolls around the 50 range, but this time he rolled a 99. I tell him that you see a portal open, and normally I would have rolled on a table to determine what came out. And, well, first I would roll to see what table I would use, see if it's a demon, a lesser demon, a greater demon, maybe a fiend, maybe a devil, perhaps Asmodeus himself, who knows. But then I realized something. He just opened a portal, essentially. And there, instead of having something random showing up, there's something trying to break through. There's something trying to escape where it currently is. There is something that wants the journal with the 8 missing pages. He opens this portal, and he sees a long, lanky, dark, slingery figure. He looks right up into his face and has to immediately make a constitution save. He fails and immediately falls unconscious. He was 1 hit point away from straight up dying. The moment he falls unconscious, the being vanishes. The others hear a collapse of a body on the floor in the attic. They all run up there, all except for one who is currently working in the bar. They surround him, and they are nervous. They see the portal open, and they attempt to close it, though it appears to be closing naturally. When they looked through it, they saw something that resembled the plane that they were on, but yet different, for there were concrete structures that were very large, and there were black rivers with yellow lines going down it. Though their glimpse was very brief as the portal closed. They looked around, and they saw nothing. The bard used a little bit of healing magic to save the wizard from death, for he was on his last death saving throw and he wasn't looking too good. He brought the wizard back to consciousness, and they asked him what happened. He confessed that he had been attempting to summon demons in order to get them more powerful. Immediately, they all just hate him, and this was something that they never forgave his character up until and after he died. They would never trust him again. Now, they were all in panic, because he described what it was to them. And out of character, all of my players were familiar with the Slender Man. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the famous Slender Man, essentially he's a long, slingery figure with a completely white face, with no discernible features on it. Looking at him kills you. He can also fly, teleport, move at incredible speeds, and has deadly tentacles on his back. He is a famous horror icon in the gaming community and has a terrible movie out about him, which I do not recommend anyone see. Also, a semi-famous YouTube franchise called Marble Hornets. Now, all of my players were familiar with at least who he was, and were deeply terrified all of a sudden. They sent one of the NPCs to go down and get the remaining player who was down at the bar. They explain to him what's going on, and immediately he closes the bar and hurries everyone out, for he knows that he cannot risk his customers, especially not like this. Now that all the customers were evacuated, they went back up all into the attic. All the PCs and their NPC companions. It was kind of funny, they actually doubled the amount of people in their party because each PC had an NPC with them at that time. One of them was the lover of another. One of them was actually formerly a were-rat, though now a trained were-rat. It was a kind of a weird and odd situation, but essentially it was almost like a pet person, but it was also an animal. It was really weird and morally confusing, but that was one of their companions. Another was another lover, and another was an employee at the bar that was very close to them. His name was Ford, and they all loved him. I have no idea why. And I'm not exactly sure to this day why they named him Ford, probably a reference to Gravity Falls. But they all just fell in love with him. Now, they all kind of filled in those who weren't there what was going on. All 8 of them were in this room contemplating on what to do, how this works. And during the time of the portal opening, the Dragonborn realized that she felt this dark presence escalate. The feeling she had was much larger than ever before, and it was now a threat to her, and she knew it. It was very close all of a sudden, opposed to what was previously very far away from her. She was afraid, and she didn't know what to do. Neither did any of the others. They all panicked and threw around ideas. The monk looked at the Dragonborn and asked her, "What, you feel this presence, what caused it?" She kind of points to this journal. The monk takes it from her. He holds it, and he feels nothing. He then opens the book, and he feels this very dark, disturbed, evil presence, and he feels that it's after him. He feels in danger. He does not feel safe, and he knows that he might not have much time left. Go past to the Dragonborn now, and she feels nothing. The presence is no longer around her. It's no longer following her. She no longer feels at risk. She sighs a breath of relief as the monk feels a fresh dose of fear which he had never felt before. Now that this monk was terrified, and he realizes that this book, if opened and touched, as he had opened and touched it, on the areas of the pages that have been torn out, that this presence would be after them. They hated their neighbor at the time. His name was Amek. So they're like, maybe we can kind of pass off this curse at the beginning. If we can just give it to him, maybe, we could solve 2 birds with 1 stone right here. So they go downstairs. They don't see anything. They are very afraid, and the monk feels the darkness coming closer and closer. They open the door to outside. I immediately make them all make checks. I don't tell them what it's for, just straight up rolls. They all roll very high. So, I describe to them. The night, it's as if any other night. There are a couple of lights from windows of the lanterns of your neighbors. Not too much to light the path. Darkness envelops some of the road. You can see across the street, though, to your neighbor Mech. They say they want to, one of them, only the monk, since he was the fastest, wants to charge across the road and get to the building of his neighbor. And the Dragonborn does follow him, though. I tell them both to make a check for me. The Dragonborn, who usually had been rolling low all night, rolled 2 pretty good rolls, and the monk rolled pretty well too. They get to the other side without anything happening. Now, the Dragonborn is freaking out at this point, so she just says, you know what, I'm kicking down this door and we're going into his house. I say, okay, make a strength check. Natural 20. She knocks that door off of its hinges and it falls to the ground as they walk in. A mech comes out from his room. He had clearly been sleeping and begins to descend the staircase, seeing his neighbors breaking into his house. He asks what's going on here because he knows they're not really a threat to him. They wouldn't dare do anything to him. And they just... the Dragonborn grabs the journal from the monk's hand and kind of throws it at him. She just says, here, this is for you. He looks very confused and picks it up and just kind of says, okay, please leave my house now. They just kind of stare at him for a minute, waiting for him to open it, but he doesn't. He just stares at them, waiting for them to leave. Eventually, they decide maybe if we leave, he'll open it, so they do. Though, as they turn around and they leave through the door that is now kicked down, they hear a distinct sound of it hitting the ground. Well, not quite the ground, but they knew that it had just been thrown into the trash. And because the monk still felt this darkness, then he knew it hadn't been opened. And if it had, it wasn't touched. They felt as if they had failed here, and they needed to get back to the others. They are able to successfully cross the street back to the rest of the group, and they begin to plan. They don't know what to do. That was their only plan, and now they don't even have the book anymore. They think maybe we need to go get the book, but then they wonder, is it safe to even go outside? Is it safe to even stay in here? What is safe and what isn't? For the wizard knew that the being isn't restricted to being outside as it was inside when it took him down, then it teleported out. For all he knew, it might have just teleported into another building and couldn't go outside. They knew nothing about this creature and what it was capable of. The necromancer of the group. He was kind of like a leader for a lot of the time. If he spoke, people listened. He had gone silent. He was still there, but he would not speak. People were getting worried. They were wondering, is he okay? Why isn't he talking? I was actually a little bit worried about the player for a moment, and I had to, take him and talk to him in private and make sure he was okay. He said yes, and when he responded, I'm just like, okay, just making sure. And then he continued to stay silent. Hours passed, not in-game time, but in real life. And the fear was growing, and I could see it in the eyes of my players. They weren't ready to die. They did not want to die. But they didn't really have a plan. After a long time passed, and everyone had been throwing around ideas that honestly were not good by any means or standards, but they were under a lot of stress and under a lot of pressure. Eventually, the necromancer chirps back up and he looks at the monk, who has been his best friend this entire journey. They had been practically inseparable. He kept secrets from everyone but seemed to share everything with him. The necromancer looked at him and said, well, basically, the gist of what he said was, you still feel this, don't you? And he said yes. He said to tell Nezarin, his former were-rat. He wanted Nezarin to know something that I won't say here. But he then went outside. I made him make a check. He succeeded. But then the others followed him because they weren't going to let him go out there alone. They knew the risk. They knew what could happen, and they weren't going to let him do it alone because even though he only really cared about the monk, the others really cared about him. They all went outside, but 5 of them failed the check I made them all take. And when this happened, as they were crossing the street, a large, slingery figure appears before them. He looks at all of them, and they all roll extraordinarily high, all of them rolling 19s and 20s except for one. One of the NPCs, who was referred often as just the muscular dwarf. He was a barbarian, and he only rolled about a 15. He immediately fell unconscious and almost died. And he was a decently leveled barbarian with a lot of hit points. He nearly died immediately. I told them all to roll for initiative, and they did. I don't remember who went first, but it wasn't Slender Man. One of them, I believe the Dragonborn went up first with her short sword. She attempted to stab at him, but she could not pierce him. Others tried as well. The monk tried to punch him, but could not seem to do any damage to him. Necromancer would cast spells, but they wouldn't seem to have much of an effect. Then it was his turn. The tentacles kind of started to emerge from his back. They spread out as they began to attack. For when he used them, he had multi-attack. He damaged all of them severely on his first turn. The monk knew that he had one weapon that could save them all, and he only had 2 uses of it. It was a modified version of the poison Crawler's Mucus. Now, Crawler's Mucus, what it normally does is the person being exposed to it has to make a Constitution saving throw. If they fail, they're paralyzed for 1 minute. This modified version is paralyzed permanently. There is a reason for that, but that will be another video. The monk takes out one. He shoves it. He does have a glove on, and he shoves it on to Slender Man. But as Slender Man turns his head to look at what he had just done, he knew that the mucus did not take effect. Another round goes by, and none of them are able to land a solid blow. Slender Man takes them all down to about 1 to 5 hit points left. The monk takes out his final piece of Crawler's Mucus, jumps, and slams it right onto his face. He does not move to look at him, but they aren't 100% sure that it was successful. They continue to attack, and they're able to land hits now. They're actually doing damage as they cut him open. A black ichor oozes out. And when it comes to his turn, he just stands there, motionless, without even moving to breathe, even if he did breathe. They continue the onslaught, and they don't stop until he is just a puddle of black ichor that laid on the streets of Waterdeep. They were able to successfully kill Slenderman because of the crawler's mucus. Otherwise, they would have all died the very next turn. After that, they all went back into the bar. They went up to their loved ones and their friends. They embraced them, and they went to bed. Probably with plenty of PTSD from that night. They never forgave the wizard for that. And the dwarf was in critical condition for a while. But they all survived the night. And they were all able to defeat the Slender Man, but just barely. And just by 1 point. Because on that Constitution saving throw, the Slender Man had a pretty big Constitution modifier, but it got a critical failure. And that was the only thing it could have gotten for the crawler's mucus to be a success. After that, they went up a couple of levels, which was what the wizard had initially intended, but they never forgave him for what he did. The next morning, the police came by, the city guard, and they asked some questions because some people had seen what had happened. A mech had given the city guard the book for evidence. One of the city guard members opened it and touched it. He mentioned to another guard how he had a bad feeling about what he just did. And then he closed the book and took it into an evidence locker. And that was the last they heard of Slender Man. I hope you all enjoyed this story. This was a really fun session to run, and honestly, it wasn't at all what I planned when we were going into it, but it ended up taking the whole session. It was actually the first time I got to play my Call of Cthulhu playlist, which I had been playing the Call of Cthulhu game, and this session made everyone really excited for the game. But being able to play the playlist of the horror theme really helped drive home how bad everything was for them right then. And I really had a really good time DMing it. I hope you all enjoyed this story. Leave me a like, comment, subscribe, and until next time, roll well.